When an elderly white woman's car breaks down on a dusty country road, she's suspicious when a young black boy offers to help. But what starts as a flat tire becomes a life-changing encounter, one that tears down assumptions, rebuilds trust, and proves that kindness can bridge the deepest divides. The sun hung heavy in the sky, drenching the narrow country road in a haze of heat. Cicadas buzzed from the dry grass, their relentless song filling the empty air. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore stood by her Cadillac, a crumpled straw hat shielding her lined face, one hand gripping the car door as she stared at the flat tire. She huffed, wiping sweat from her forehead with a trembling hand. Her neatly pressed blouse clung to her skin, and her ankles ached from standing too long on the cracked asphalt. She fumbled with her phone again, raising it high, willing it to find a signal. Nothing. Just a blank screen mocking her helplessness. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. She was too old for this, too alone. Just as a wave of frustration bubbled up in her chest, she caught sight of something, or someone, moving at the edge of the road. She squinted, the glare making it hard to see. A boy, young, maybe 12 or 13, walked toward her, his steps sure and unhurried. His t-shirt was faded, his sneakers scuffed and dusty. Eleanor's breath hitched. She felt the familiar automatic prickle of wariness crawl up her spine. Out here, alone, with no one around for miles. Every story she had ever been told about strangers flashed through her mind in an instant. The boy slowed as he neared, lifting a hand in a casual, polite wave. His face was open, calm, not a trace of threat in it. But the warnings whispered louder in her ears than reason did. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Looks like you got a flat." Eleanor gripped her purse a little tighter. Her voice, when it came, sounded thinner than she intended. "Yes, I'm waiting for help." The boy nodded, glancing down at the sagging tire. "Phone service is pretty bad out here. You might be waiting a while." He smiled, small but genuine. "I can help, if you want." The air between them grew thick, heavy with everything unspoken. Eleanor looked him over, really looked, and for a flicker of a moment, she saw him not through the lens of fear, but through the reality in front of her. A boy. Just a boy. Offering help on a blistering afternoon. Still, hesitation gnawed at her. "I don't want to trouble you," she said, the words more habit than truth. "No trouble at all," he replied easily. "Got a jack and a spare?" She hesitated a beat longer before nodding slowly and pointing to the trunk. The boy moved to it without another word, careful and respectful, as if he knew he was walking a tightrope he hadn't asked to be on. Eleanor watched him, her hands wringing the brim of her hat, a strange flutter of unease and shame stirring inside her. She had no idea then that this boy was about to change far more than her tire. The trunk creaked open with a reluctant groan. The boy rummaged around for a moment, pulling out the rust-speckled jack and the spare tire, balancing them with the easy rhythm of someone who had done this before. Eleanor hovered nearby, arms crossed tightly over her chest, heart thudding louder than she liked to admit. She kept darting glances up and down the empty road, half expecting someone, or something, to appear out of the shimmering heat. "You can sit if you want," the boy said without looking up, nodding toward the shaded patch beneath a scraggly oak tree. His voice was casual, light, but there was a carefulness in it too, as if he could feel her fear, even if she hadn't spoken it out loud. Eleanor didn't move. She just watched, hands still clenched around the strap of her purse. He knelt beside the tire, working with a quiet confidence that unsettled her more than it should have. Every so often he wiped his forehead on his sleeve, never once complaining about the heat or the grime. "You sure you know what you're doing?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The boy glanced up, grinning just a little. "Yes, ma'am. My uncle's got a garage. I help out after school sometimes." There was no cockiness in his tone, just steady certainty. Eleanor shifted her weight, the gravel crunching under her sensible shoes. She felt ridiculous standing there, supervising him like a hawk. But old habits dug their claws in deep, and letting go of them wasn't as easy as flipping a switch. Still, as she watched him loosen the lug nuts and position the jack, her fear began to lose its edge. He moved methodically, checking and double-checking, not rushing even though the sun beat down mercilessly on both of them. "You're very efficient," she said after a long silence, her voice softer this time. The boy chuckled, a low, easy sound that cracked the tension hanging between them. "Had a lot of practice," he said, tightening the last bolt with a grunt. "Folks around here don't always have money for tow trucks." Eleanor nodded, the reality of his words settling heavily on her chest. She hadn't even thought about what it meant to grow up in a place where a simple flat tire could be more than just an inconvenience. Within minutes, the spare was on, the tools packed neatly back into the trunk. The boy dusted off his hands on his jeans and stepped back, giving her a small, satisfied smile. "All set, ma'am," he said. "You're good to go." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, something tight and uncomfortable twisting inside her. She had expected danger. She had expected disrespect. Instead, she had been given help. Freely, quietly, and without a single expectation in return. And for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor Whitmore didn't know quite what to say. The boy knelt by the tire, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, the sun hammering down without mercy. His movements were steady, careful, every bolt tightened with precision. He didn't fidget. He didn't rush. He worked like someone who knew the value of doing a job right the first time. Eleanor stood a few feet away, her hands twisting the hem of her blouse, heart still uneasy but for reasons she couldn't name anymore. Her mind, trained over a lifetime to categorize, to assume, kept searching for something. Some excuse to keep the wall between them standing tall and strong. But there was nothing. The boy didn't glance up at her with resentment. He didn't smirk or posture or act as if he were owed something for his trouble. He just worked, patiently, kindly, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor's gaze dropped to his sneakers, worn thin at the toes, held together in places with stubborn pieces of duct tape. She saw the dust on his knees, the sweat darkening the back of his shirt. Nothing about him said he had much, but everything about him said he had enough. Enough pride, enough heart, to stand here, sweating in the middle of nowhere, helping a woman who hadn't yet found the courage to fully meet his eyes. A lump caught in her throat. How many times had she crossed the street to avoid someone like him? How many times had she gripped her purse tighter, quickened her pace, told herself it was just being careful? The jack squeaked as he lowered the car back to the ground. He double-checked the bolts, giving them one final tug before standing up and wiping his hands on his jeans. A small cloud of dust rose around him, carried off by the faintest breeze. "You're good now, ma'am," he said, stepping back respectfully. Eleanor swallowed hard, feeling the weight of something shifting deep inside her. A crack, a hairline fracture in the wall she'd built over years of quiet distrust, shaped by stories that were easier to accept than challenged. She forced herself to really look at him now. Not at his skin, not at his clothes, but at the boy standing there, offering nothing but honest help. "Thank you," she said, the words awkward, stiff, but sincere. He smiled again, that same easy, unaffected grin that made her heart pinch painfully in her chest. "No problem, ma'am," he said simply. He turned slightly, ready to walk away, already brushing the moment off as something ordinary. But for Eleanor Whitmore, standing in the oppressive heat on that lonely road, it was anything but ordinary. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet fully understand, something that would stay with her long after the dust had settled and the road behind her had disappeared. Eleanor reached into her purse with trembling fingers, brushing past the familiar folds of tissue and peppermints until she found her wallet. She pulled out a crisp 20, hesitated, then tucked another bill behind it for good measure. It was the least she could do. She stepped forward, holding the money out toward the boy, her hand slightly unsteady. "Here," she said, forcing a smile. "For your trouble." The boy glanced at the bills, then back up at her with a look that wasn't scornful or greedy. It was simply kind. He shook his head slowly, his hands remaining stuffed into the pockets of his worn jeans. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, "but I don't need anything." Eleanor blinked, confused. She thrust the money out a little farther, unsure why the refusal unsettled her more than it should have. "I insist," she said. "You helped me. Let me pay you for your time." The boy smiled again, calm, patient, immovable. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "Just glad I could help. You have a safe trip, okay?" For a moment, Eleanor just stood there, frozen with the bills still dangling between her fingers, while the boy gave her a respectful nod and turned to walk away, his sneakers kicking up little clouds of dust as he headed down the long stretch of empty road. She watched him go, the heat shimmering around his small frame until he blurred into the horizon. The money felt heavy now, awkward in her hand. Slowly she lowered it, slipping it back into her wallet, feeling a strange and unfamiliar ache press against her chest. People didn't just do things for nothing anymore. At least, that's what she had always believed. Yet here was this boy, who had every reason to want more, to expect more, turning down what little she had to offer without hesitation. Not out of pride, not out of defiance, but simply because it was never about that for him. Eleanor sat heavily in the driver's seat, the leather scorching against the backs of her legs. She adjusted the rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of the boy disappearing around a bend in the road. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. Something inside her had shifted again, deeper this time, unsettling and profound. She had expected danger. She had braced herself for disrespect. Instead, she had been met with grace, unasked for, unbought, freely given. Eleanor started the engine and pulled back onto the road, the tires humming against the cracked asphalt. The countryside rolled by her window in blurred greens and golds. But her mind wasn't on the scenery. It was still back there, on that stretch of hot, dusty road. And the boy who had given her something far more valuable than a fixed tire. Something she hadn't realized she was missing until he placed it, quietly, back in her hands. The miles slipped away beneath Eleanor's tires, but her mind stayed stubbornly behind, tangled up in the image of the boy walking down that dusty road with nothing but the sun at his back, and a quiet kind of dignity she couldn't shake. She should have felt relief, gratitude, maybe a little embarrassment. Instead, what she felt was something deeper, something restless. By the time she reached the edges of town, a scatter of weather-beaten storefronts and shaded porches, she found herself turning off the main road, slowing in front of a small diner with faded blue paint, and a hand-painted open sign dangling from the window. It wasn't planned. It was pure instinct, guided by a pull she didn't fully understand. Inside, the place smelled like coffee and bacon grease, the air thick and familiar. A few heads turned when she entered, but most quickly returned to their conversations, the easy hum of small-town life folding around her. Eleanor approached the counter where a woman in an apron wiped down coffee mugs with practiced hands. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice lower than usual. "I'm looking for a young boy. I had a flat tire out on Route 7, and he helped me, about 12 or 13. Skinny, polite." The woman's hands paused mid-wipe. She smiled, a slow knowing smile, and set the mug down. "Sounds like you ran into Isaiah," she said. "Sweetest boy you'll ever meet. Always helping folks when they're stuck, just like his grandma raised him." Eleanor leaned in, heart thudding strangely in her chest. "His grandmother?" The woman nodded, flipping her towel over her shoulder. "Raised him since he was a baby. They live over by Willow Creek, little white house with the red mailbox. Hard life, but you won't hear either of them complain." Eleanor nodded, murmuring a thank you, though the words felt small and inadequate. She turned back toward the door, the bell above it jingling softly as she stepped back into the heat. Willow Creek. A name she hadn't thought about in years. The part of town people like her had learned to avoid, though no one ever said it out loud. She sat in her car, staring at the cracked dashboard, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. Her fingers tapped absently against the steering wheel. The boy, Isaiah, had offered help without asking who she was, without needing anything in return. And somehow, she realized, that made her feel even smaller than if he had taken the money and run. She had driven into town looking for answers. What she found instead was a mirror. And for the first time in a long while, Eleanor Whitmore didn't quite recognize the reflection staring back at her. The next morning, Eleanor rose before the sun, the house still heavy with the cool hush of early hours. She moved through her kitchen in a daze, pulling out flour, sugar, eggs, ingredients she hadn't touched in months, maybe longer. Her hands worked on muscle memory alone, mixing, kneading, shaping, as if trying to bake away the knot of something raw and unfinished inside her chest. By mid-morning, a basket of warm biscuits, wrapped carefully in a clean cloth, sat in the passenger seat beside her as she steered her car toward Willow Creek. The roads grew narrower, the houses humbler, and the doubts louder in her mind. What was she even doing? Would they think she was pitying them? Would they slam the door in her face? And wouldn't she deserve it? But the thought of Isaiah's smile, patient and fearless in the blazing heat, pushed her forward. The little white house with the red mailbox was easy to find. The paint was peeling, the yard overgrown with wild flowers and stubborn patches of dandelions. But the place breathed a kind of life and care that no fresh paint could fake. Eleanor sat for a moment, hands clenched around the steering wheel, before gathering the basket and walking up the uneven path. She knocked, heart hammering harder than she cared to admit. The door swung open a moment later. A woman in her 60s stood there, her graying hair pulled back in a loose bun, an apron tied around her waist. Her face was lined with the kind of strength life carves into you, but her eyes, soft brown and steady, were kind. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm but cautious. Eleanor cleared her throat, nerves tightening her throat. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore," she said. "I believe your grandson helped me yesterday. Out on Route 7. The woman's face lit up instantly, the tension draining from her shoulders. "That sounds like my Isaiah," she said, a smile breaking through. "Always looking out for folks." Eleanor held out the basket awkwardly, feeling the weight of more than just biscuits in her hands. I just wanted to say thank you, and to apologize. Not just for yesterday, but for how people like me have treated people like you. For assumptions I made before that boy ever said a word." The words tumbled out clumsily, but they were real. The woman looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing between them. Then she reached out, took the basket gently, and stepped aside. "Come in," she said simply. "No need to stand out there sweating." Inside, the house was simple but full of life. Family photos on the walls, the smell of fresh coffee in the air, a worn Bible sitting open on the table. And there, at the kitchen sink, Isaiah turned around, his face lighting up with surprise. "Hey, ma'am," he said, grinning that same wide, easy grin. Eleanor smiled back, something inside her loosening for the first time in years. She hadn't just brought biscuits to this doorstep. She had brought herself, stripped of the armor she hadn't realized she wore, and somehow, miraculously, found the door still open. The town square buzzed with life, the annual summer fair unfolding under a bright sky that seemed almost too blue to be real. Booths lined the sidewalks, the smells of popcorn and barbecue weaving through the warm air. Kids darted between hay bales, clutching balloons and dripping ice cream cones. Eleanor Whitmore stood near the community center, a paper plate of peach cobbler balanced carefully in one hand. A few months ago, she would have hovered at the edges of a crowd like this, offering polite smiles and keeping to familiar faces. Today was different. She glanced to her right where Isaiah was helping his grandmother set up a table of handmade crafts. Wooden toys, knit scarves, small jars of preserves. His easy laughter floated through the air as he showed a younger boy how to toss beanbags at a Target booth. Eleanor smiled without even realizing it, feeling the warmth of it settle deep into her chest. The change had been slow at first, like the soft creep of dawn across a dark field. A visit here, a shared meal there. Isaiah's grandmother had welcomed her not with suspicion, but with quiet grace. as if she'd known all along that hearts were better healed with hospitality than with walls. And people had noticed. Neighbors who once stiffened at Eleanor's name began waving when they saw her with Isaiah's family. Conversations that might have ended with nods and polite distance stretched into something more. Into real listening. Real laughter. Little by little, the invisible lines that had divided the town softened, worn down not by speeches or grand gestures, but by small, stubborn acts of connection. Across the square, a woman Eleanor had known for years but never truly spoken to caught her eye. She hesitated, then approached, offering a cautious smile. "I heard what you did," the woman said, nodding toward Isaiah's booth. "It's good to see. Makes you think about what else we've been getting wrong." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she forced herself to hold the woman's gaze and nod. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," she said quietly. Later, as the sun dipped lower, casting everything in a soft golden light, Eleanor found herself sitting on a bench beside Isaiah's grandmother. They watched Isaiah race across the field with a pack of other kids, his laughter carrying high into the evening sky. "You did good coming here," the older woman said, passing Eleanor a cup of sweet tea. Eleanor accepted it with a small, grateful smile. "I think Isaiah did the real work," she said. They sat in easy silence after that, sipping tea, letting the music and laughter of the fair wash over them. What had started as a flat tire on a lonely road had turned into something neither of them could have predicted. A small crack had broken open, and through it, something beautiful had begun to grow. Not overnight, not all at once, but seed by seed, heart by heart, the town was finding its way back to something it had almost forgotten it could be. Something better.